Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we're continuing our conversation on the Minnesota Vikings and their upcoming matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles. So we'll talk primarily about this because that's really the major thing going on in Vikings land right now, as I'm sure most of you guys are well aware. We'll touch on some injuries and stuff like that. Andrew Sendejo recovering from concussion. We got Adam Thielen missed practice earlier this week, so we'll talk a little bit about kind of the consequences of those things. And then from there, we'll just kind of see what happens. We got some Twitter questions and social media thoughts and all that type of stuff. For those of you that are not aware, if you'd like to send in a thought or question, you don't necessarily need to send them in right when we say it on Twitter. If you want to hit us up on Instagram, we're going to make an Instagram page, but for right now, you can hit us up on Instagram at Robert Reidell. That's my Instagram profile. If that's the medium you use. If you like to use Twitter, Vikings ATL Pod is the place to find us there. You can shoot me an email, reidellr4@gmail.com if you'd like to remain anonymous. And yeah, so make sure you do that and give us some more stuff to work with because we love answering all your guys' thoughts, questions, jokes, anything you got for us. We will talk about it. That's what we do. So that's the plan here for today. Let's quickly talk about the Black Stag Watch Party once again. I got a few updates for you guys. It sounds like we're going to have a pretty cool production for you guys. That's the plan right now, and Drew and I will both be down there doing a live show. Again, I'm not 100% on what that's going to look like, but that is set in stone at this point, so we'll be doing a live pregame show, and then you can watch the game at the 190-inch TV. It's incredible stuff. We're going to have a lot of fun doing it, and hope to see you guys out there. Like I've said multiple times across this week, last week was an absolute blast, and if I've seen anything from Philadelphia this week, it's that this game is going to be it will likely be just as big of a test for the Vikings, and we could see some more fun moments pop up once again. So let's start talking about that right now, actually. So Philadelphia, we talked about Fletcher Cox a lot. We talked about Brandon Graham a lot. We talked about Malcolm Jenkins a lot. Ronald Darby, the cornerback, is another guy that we've talked about quite a bit here. I guess to start off the show, which guy on this Philadelphia defense? Because I think this is going to be a defensive showdown. That's kind of what I'm seeing from both of these. Should be. You'd think so, right? Based off of what you can see on
football, you never know. Sports, who knows what's going to happen, right? This is kind of how it is with every sport. You just don't. You can never actually predict what's going to happen. But
right.
We'll try.
But we will try. So Fletcher Cox, Malcolm Jenkins, who is the guy on this Philadelphia Eagles defense for you that is the biggest threat to what the Vikings try to do offensively?
Well, based on what I saw last week with the New Orleans Saints, I am looking at Brandon Graham here because of what Cameron Jordan was able to do to Rashad Hill. I think he had a sack, at least one sack, but there was countless pressures and hits that were affected by Cameron Jordan getting past Rashad Hill, and the Vikings didn't seem to want to give him help on that side. There wasn't a lot of chipping. There wasn't a lot of added help from Kyle Rudolph at tight end, and even one time on the Case Keenum interception, actually, Rudolph was left isolated with Cameron Jordan over there, and Brandon Graham is as dangerous, in my opinion, as Cameron Jordan. So it's going to be, I think he could be the difference maker. He could be the guy, I guess, that would create a big turnover for the Eagles or, knock the Vikings out of field goal range with a big sack, something like that could turn this game around. So I'll be looking at how the Vikings protect Case Keenum from Brandon Graham and how Rashad Hill performs on that side and what kind of help, if Jerick McKinnon or Tavius Murray is going to help protect over there. Is Kyle Rudolph going to be over there? What are the Vikings going to do differently? Because they probably need to change up what they did or change up how they blocked Cameron Jordan. They should probably change that up with Graham this week.
You'd think so. I actually I've seen on social media a couple times this week that people have been talking about that specifically. The way that Cameron Jordan was kind of able to rip into the Vikings a little bit. That was not awesome.
It's nice. It was nice that Hill came up big when it mattered. The last couple of plays there, he was stonewalled Jordan. But throughout the game, especially in that second half, Jordan got home often.
So, like you said, kind of the question you pose is how can the Vikings better defend this? that type of thing. It's tough to say. It really is, because Brandon Graham, like I said on the last show, is both a power rusher and a finesse rusher. I think that he's more of a finesse rusher. That's kind of what I see from him. He does a better job with kind of using his hands and kind of beating guys off the line of scrimmage, similar to what Everson Griffin kind of does well, in the sense that, he literally gets his hands on guys and just kind of controls their range of motion. That's what Brandon Graham does pretty well from what I have seen. So is there a correct way to stop this guy? I don't know. And part of the problem there is because Fletcher Cox is in the interior, and you have to worry about him as well. Remember, you only get to have 11 guys on the field. The goal, as always, is to try to match up 11 on 11 and hope that one of your guys finds space to operate. With Fletcher Cox in the middle there, that's not easy to do. That's considerably easier said than done, I think. And so is there a right way to do this? Probably not. I mean, you can look at adding, beefing up the line of scrimmage, trying to add, maybe use C.J. Ham to chip off the line, but that might leave someone else free. So that's asking your receivers to do quite a bit on the outside to beat one-on-one press coverage if that's what the Eagles try to do. So is there a right way to slow down these guys? No. But I'm going to just go back to what I've been saying before about just adapting to the circumstances. If you can tell that Brandon Graham is coming hard off the edge and he's trying to get home, that he's not just running a stunt or something like that to disrupt the defensive line and kind of put someone else in a position to get a sack. Vinny Curry is someone that Mike Zimmer mentioned in his press conference. We've talked a lot about Fletcher Cox already. Bo Allen has done well from the interior, in my opinion. You look at all these different guys. It's tough to say, but I do think that that the Vikings have the capacity to stop all of them. It's just a matter of kind of adapting to the situation.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely have the capacity to. They've done it this year before with talented rushers and talented defenses. But, I mean, I'm just going kind of off of the recency bias, watching what happened with the Vikings and with Rashad Hill and Cameron Jordan that entire game. The Vikings did go away from the Mike Grimmer's experiment at right tackle, which was kind of seen as an iffy move at the time. Obviously the Vikings won the game, but it doesn't appear, who knows if Mike Remmers would have performed better on that side with Rashad Hill and if the Vikings had kept Jeremiah Searles at left guard. But I would imagine now the Vikings will stick with those five guys, Reef Remmers, Elflein, Berger, and Hill on the offensive line. So it's going to be it's going to be imperative to help Hill over there with Brandon Graham. And Graham will move around a little bit as well, but mostly he'll be on that side when he's rushing the passer. And then, you got so many pass rushers on that. You got talked about Curry. Chris Long will jump in there too. There's so many guys that it's going to be tough. It's going to be important for guys to win the one-on-one matchups in the interior here in the offensive line because a lot of guys, Reef will be left alone most of the time. Remmers will probably be left alone most of the time. But Elflein, Berger, Hill, and with the backs helping out Hill as well, are going to have to be teaming up there for Cox and Graham much of the game, and keeping them in check will be important to allow Case Keenum to deliver the ball down the field to Thielen Diggs, who I think can have Philly's talent. Philly's secondary is talented for sure. There's no doubt about that. But I think the combination of Diggs and Thielen can get the edge over those DBs in Philly, in my opinion.
Yeah, you look at these defensive backs specifically. You mentioned a couple of them there. Ronald Darby is the number one guy for me, the cornerback, kind of the biggest threat to what the Vikings like to do from an offensive standpoint, simply because he can knock guys off their routes, and he can also cover in. This is going to sound redundant, but it's not. He can cover in off coverage as well. He does a good job setting his feet and kind of finding his man and doing the best job possible for the situation. So I really like Ronald Darby. Arif Hassan was talking about him yesterday at Buffalo Wild Wings during the zone coverage, kind of shindig that they were doing, and he was talking about how Darby has been consistently good this entire season, and at different points in the year that he's actually kind of been a better cornerback than Rhodes. And what makes this, what kind of why that's relevant, not just because it's a Philadelphia-Minnesota matchup. These are also two FSU cornerbacks, right? Florida State cornerbacks, you have to imagine that they know each other to some degree, simply because they're the same relative age group, and it becomes a competitiveness thing, like who is the best Florida State cornerback. Deion Sanders kind of has he kind of walks away with this one now. So when he talks,
he's kind of running the show as far as Florida State quarterbacks, right?
Right, but it's a factory down there. There's a lot of good cornerbacks. PJ Williams, who we saw last week, also from Florida State as well. So they make cornerbacks down there. That's what they seem to do very well. I don't have a clue how they're doing it, but it seems like every single time these cornerbacks get to the NFL, they find a way to play well. And maybe that's a mentality thing that they teach down there. Maybe it's a chip on the shoulder type thing where they recruit players who are just pissed off the moment they get in there. And I don't know. But as a whole, these are very, very talented players. And what allows Darby to do as much as he does, I suppose, is Malcolm Jenkins, I think, because, you look at Rhodes' success and we kind of attribute that to Harrison Smith to a degree. Rhodes is good on his own, don't get me wrong, but Harrison Smith being able to move around the formation, you never really know when he's going to be doubling over the top. It kind of allows Rhodes to sort of do his thing a little bit more, gamble a little bit more, trust his instincts a little bit more, and not have to worry about someone beating him over the top. So you have to look at Malcolm Jenkins here as a primary factor for why this defense is able to play, as well as it has this season.
Yeah, you talked about Jenkins last week on the last show as kind of a light version of Harrison Smith, that he can move around and he's very versatile. So that's obviously going to be another major impact, how well he can set the edge, how well the Vikings can reach on those blocks and cut him off from setting the edge. Right. That's going to be important as well in setting the run for this offense. So, and we could go through all of these playmakers on defense, but from top to bottom, their league ranks are very, very good. In total yards, they're fourth. In points, they're fourth. They have the fourth most interceptions. They allow the seventh fewest net yards per attempt passing the ball. Rushing, they are number one in yards allowed, and they're number 6 in yards per attempt. This is truly an elite defense, and I don't think there's any doubt about it. So, I said last show they're the best defense the Vikings are going to play this season, I think, or at least up to this point. If they get Jacksonville in the Super Bowl, then that would be the one team that could, overtake the Eagles in that spot. But regardless, this will be one of the most difficult challenges for this Vikings offense all season long. And I would say the same for Nick Foles and company on the other side. But I think if the Vikings offense can manage 2 touchdown drives, and I think that's a realistic proposition, I think. Mm-hmm. 2 touchdown drives in this game, whether it be they get a big play down the field, whether it be the running game clicks for a drive or two. We saw that in Detroit right out of halftime, where they just had 4 long runs and it was a touchdown. Something like that, where they can just get 1 or 2 big plays and score. I think that would be enough in this game, and I do like Vikings, Minnesota's chances to do that more than I like Philadelphia's chances to do that.
I tend to agree. I tend to lean in that same direction as you. I think the Vikings have more talent. Strictly from an overall defensive perspective, we've highlighted a number of these Eagles players. They clearly have at least 11 guys that can get the job done. The thing that's different about this Vikings defense is they have more than 11 guys that can get the job done. That's what I've seen this year. You look at the defensive line. There are probably 6 or 7 guys that sort of rotate in on occasion. From a week-to-week perspective, we've seen snaps from pretty much everyone except for Jaleel Johnson, I believe, this year, in terms of guys that are active on game day. Yep. And then at the linebacker level, we've seen it's primarily going to be Barr and Kendricks, right? But we've also seen Ben Gideon, we've seen Emmanuel Lemur, and we've seen all these other guys as well. So, it's and then get to the secondary, and the secondary has off the top of my head, how many guys are there? There's Rhodes, Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander,
I'm
Newman,
thinking eight guys right now that are contributing regularly.
Anderson Dejo, Anthony Harris contributed a big way last week when called upon. Everyone is being used on this Vikings defense. So, I kind of want to touch on this a little bit because I saw this tossed around by a couple different people and, people I was talking to this week. These are 4 very good defensive teams remaining in the playoffs. You can make an argument that the Patriots are not that great of a defensive team. but they're still allowing, I think it's like 18.5 points per game or
They're
something like that.
Fifth fewest points allowed per game in the regular season.
Right, and Belichick is as great of a defensive mind as they come. And, from what I've seen, he's been able to sort of take guys out of the game.
And Matt Patricia's going to get a head coaching job most likely.
And he deserves it. He absolutely deserves it. So the question I'll pose to you then, Drew, is we've seen all four of these teams, some more than others. The Vikings probably the most, I would hope. The Eagles quite a bit as well over the course of this week, and preparing for kind of the inevitable to a degree. I think a lot of people were expecting the Eagles to get this far. Maybe when Carson Wentz got hurt, things changed a little bit, but you understand what I'm saying. Jacksonville's defense is highly touted and very loud. They like to talk, so I think a lot of people.
Yeah, they do.
I think a lot of people are fairly well aware of what they can do defensively. And then you got the Patriots, who I just mentioned. They've got a ton of talent on the defensive side of the football, but it starts with Belichick and Matt Patricia and putting guys in the right spot. They're very good. So of these four teams, my question now, what I've been ramping up to for about 45 seconds here.
For a long time.
My question is, which is the weakest defensive team here?
The weakest defense, I have to go New England, and it's tough to say that without a negative connotation, but
right.
I have to, and it's just because Minnesota, Jacksonville, and Philadelphia are all I think they have more depth on all three levels than New England does, and I think I just think the talent's there, and I think Belichick schematically is not the worst coach or not the worst defensive coordinator, or I guess Patricia, but I think that there's just more talent on these defenses in Philadelphia, Jacksonville, and Minnesota. I think Jacksonville's the new Seattle from, I guess, 4 years ago, would be now 5 years ago. They're the new Seattle, the loud kind of turnover machines. I think they're kind of taking their spot there as that kind of that defense that, not a huge market in Seattle, but they're loud, they gain attention, and that's what I see from them. Ramsey's kind of taking Richard Sherman's spot as a loud corner that's just dominant in the NFL. But yeah, I think talent-wise, Minnesota, Philadelphia, and Jacksonville are just a step ahead of New England. That's why I'll put them last. But again, that does not mean New England's defense is bad at all. They're still very, very good.
Right, and again, it comes down to positioning sometimes, and Belichick and Patricia do that as well as anyone. But from the defensive side, from that perspective, I suppose, I think that Jacksonville is probably the second best defense here. Which, like you kind of said, what you alluded to, I suppose, is it seems kind of weird because it's coming out of nowhere to a degree. You mentioned the market. In Jacksonville, they've struggled to get fans into their stadium for many, many, many years. And now it's kind of hard not to want to cheer for the Jaguars to a degree, right? They've got all these young players.
Yep.
They're fun players on top of
that. I remember Malik Jackson back in July said, I think he even said in a presser of some kind, said, we're going to the Super Bowl, and everybody laughed at him. Now they're one game away, and I think that's part of their their cockiness, their swagger, that marketability
I like that
they have, and that's why I'm reminded of the Seattle defense from 5 years ago. Is they talked the talk and they backed it up. I mean, and I think Jacksonville has a very good chance to do that with this Super Bowl thing, because nobody on this planet would have thought Blake Bortles would be going to a Super Bowl, but he's going to a Super Bowl potentially because of how talented that defense is. And we saw that performing for a long time.
But that defense got torched last week, and Bortles stepped up.
That's true. He did make a lot of big plays.
I understand that Pittsburgh is as good of an offensive team as you're probably going to see. I don't think many people will disagree with me on that. When you look at Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Martavis Bryant, Ben Roethlisberger, good protection up front. I mean, it's pretty clear to me that they're a very solid, if not great offensive team. So they were going to get points probably regardless. Like that's how defense is from time to time. But the big thing for the Jaguars is that Bortles stepped up, and he continues to step up. I mean, who would have – if I told you back in September, Drew, that Blake Bortles was going to put up 45 points on the Pittsburgh Steelers to go to the AFC Championship, you would have laughed at me, and I would have laughed with you.
I'll still laugh at you because that's not what happened. Well,
close enough. You know what I'm saying. Wild card round, divisional round.
He made enough plays, but Leonard Fournette ran the ball really well. They got a fumble 6, but regardless of how that Jaguars and Patriots game goes, it's going to be another really good defense in the Super Bowl from the AFC, and a phenomenal defense in the Super Bowl from the NFC. And that cliche that defense wins championships, it has gained a lot of credibility this season, I think, because
I would say so too.
you have Nick Foles, Case Keenum, and Blake Bortles all vying for a Super Bowl right now.
And Tom Brady. Let's say okay. No, but let me preface this though, because I'm the one here that argues in favor of Tom Brady pretty much at all times. I almost will always go to his defense. But even Tom Brady will tell you he's not the same quarterback he used to be. I believe he literally said that, a couple weeks ago that, he still believes he's good, and he still believes that he can play the game at a high level. And I think that
he says these things, but then he also tells us that he's going to play at a high level until he's 45.
And we've heard that one. We've heard that one before.
We'll talk about cocky. That guy's cocky. But anyway, I think we're pretty good off topic here, aren't we? We're a ways off topic, kind of.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fine. All right. Let's get back over into the Vikings then. So we talked about the Philadelphia defense. Let's talk about the Philadelphia offense a little bit more now. We'll do the exact same thing that we just did. We've talked about a lot of the playmakers already. Nick Foles is the quarterback. Alshon Jeffrey, the wide receiver, phenomenal. Almost signed in Minnesota this offseason. So to a degree, this is probably personal for Alshon, and I wouldn't blame him. Torrey Smith, very good player. It's always kind of been a straight line route runner guy, but I think that he's done a better job from a technical standpoint this season in terms of running other stuff other than 7, 8s, and 9s, which are the deep routes, if you're not familiar with the route tree. So he's been pretty solid. And then Nelson Aguilar, my God. How many people wrote him off after his rookie season? I'm fine. I'll say it. I wrote him off after his rookie year. I thought he was very good at USC, but I saw nothing as a rookie. Like, absolutely nothing. And I just want to point out, because I don't know how important this is, but it seems relevant given the circumstances of this season. Carson Wentz took all of these receivers to his place in North Dakota, and I believe they went hunting and fishing, and just had a good time together.
Had a good time in North Dakota.
How about that, right?
Kind of an oxymoron, right?
I don't know about that, but I see your point. And so, kind of what I'm ramping up to here is that, team camaraderie isn't just a Vikings thing. It seems to be working for the Eagles as well. And Carson Wentz isn't there anymore, so it's a little bit different. But I'd like to believe that Carson Wentz is probably coaching Nick Foles on the sideline and telling the receivers, "Hey, you got to trust this guy. Like, I'm not in there. Like, that's how it's gonna be. Like, sorry, that's the situation right now. I can't play Nick Foles as the quarterback. You got to play for him as well." So, which offensive player here? Not the offensive line. Let's get away from them for a little bit here. We are already pretty aware of Lane Johnson being about as good as they get from a tackle perspective, and you mentioned Jason Kelce as well. From a skill player perspective, including the receivers, including these running backs that we've also talked about a little bit already, who is the most dangerous athlete that the Vikings will have to face against the Philadelphia Eagles offense this week?
See, I would say Alshon Jeffrey, but I think Xavier Rhodes matches up pretty well with him. It has in the past.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So I'm going to go with LeGarrette Blount here because – and this is a little bit different because you think of an athlete, you think of speed, you think of agility, you think of the ability to make people miss in space with the football. He's more of a ground and pound, wear you out type of runner. I think the Vikings are able to succumb to that. And I think Blunt's the kind of guy that can wear you out. And if the Eagles do get a lead late in the game, he's the one type of runner that I think could be the kryptonite of the Vikings run defense. So I'm a little bit worried about him. And if the Eagles get a lead and they're trying to run the clock out, but again, I do trust this Vikings run defense as well. They've been rock solid all year long. Number 2, I believe, in the regular season at yards per carry allowed. So there's no doubt about the Vikings' ability to stop the run. I just think Blount is the guy that I think could wear this team out enough to run the clock out late, or get a situational first down when it's needed, something like that. So that's the guy I'm worried about because I like the Trey Waynes, Torrey Smith matchup. I like Alshon Jeffrey versus Xavier Rhodes. I'm not as scared of Nelson Aguilar. Again, just a lot of that's just because of Nick Foles playing quarterback. So I think the running game will scare me the most, and I think Blount, especially in key situations, will scare me the most.
That's an interesting pick, and I don't hate it because we talked about last show that Blunt is a guy that does very well in short yardage situations. And we also talked about on the last show that getting 1 yard sometimes is not all that difficult. Remember, relative to the NFL, 1 yard is not all that difficult. That's why when you get 3rd and 1 stops like Anthony Harris did last week, it should be people should talk more about it. Let's put it that way. But so Blunt is interesting because you remember how everyone always used to said that Adrian Peterson runs pissed off. He just runs angry. That's the player that he is. Well, LeGarrette Blunt definitely runs very similar. He's
he doesn't have the speed or the quickness that Peterson does, but I think the power is definitely there, and the mean streak is there too.
The mean streak is definitely there. I remember when he signed in Philadelphia. So Blunt is a guy that I like to go to bat for because I think that he's kind of been wronged throughout his career. He's a guy that's been playing on 1-year contracts every single season. He had 18 touchdowns last year, and the Patriots were like, 1-year contract. That's what you get. And Philadelphia was like, all right, come to Philadelphia then because we want you. We believe that you're better than that contract. And so Blunt is cool. What I like about Blunt specifically is that he's never needed to be the guy. He's never needed to be the guy that gets 30 carries in a game. And in an NFL where it's shifting more to a multiple running back system, you've seen Jay Ajayi take a bit of a reduced role to a degree versus the one that he had in Miami in order to kind of get Blunt and Corey Clement more touches and kind of keep everyone fresh. That seems to be a good way to go about things. But so for Blunt, he's definitely very dangerous. I don't think that there's much of an argument for that at this point in his career, especially in short yardage situations. But I do think that Ajayi is probably more dangerous simply because he can catch the ball better out of the backfield. And that's something that's kind of always difficult to read if you don't see it coming from a mile away. The Vikings have, to a degree, struggled on screens throughout the year. That's debatable at this point because I think they have been a lot better as of late, but that's something that they have had issues with. But we've seen Harrison Smith blow those up on occasion. So, it's one of those things. Screen passes are a timing thing. If you call it the right time, Ajayi can take that thing to the house. That's what he's done before. The Vikings have had issues with that in the past. We've seen multiple different guys. I think so. Last week they allowed a long screen play to was it Kamara?
Yeah.
Something like that.
I mean, I think Ingram and Kamara both had one, but a lot of that's just because Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara, Sean Payton as well.
Right. So, you look at this situation here, and I think that all of these running backs and a couple of these receivers all, bring something to the table that the Vikings may have an issue with. You mentioned Jeffrey and Xavier Rhodes in their past history. They have done. That's been a phenomenal matchup back when Jeffrey was in Chicago. Rhodes got the better of him for the most part, but there were a couple of occasions, I believe, when Jeffrey beat him as well. So, you look at that matchup, that's interesting. That one should be a lot of fun. Then you look at the one on the outside as well. With Trey Waynes and Torrey Smith, if that proves to be how the Vikings want to align their cornerbacks, that one could be fun as well because that's just pure speed. That's 4-3 versus 4-4 or something like that.
One more thing we should also mention is, Philadelphia's leading receiver is not even a receiver. It's Zach Ertz at tight end, both leading in receptions and yards. So that's another element here to the Philadelphia offense, and a lot of his. The yardage he gained, the statistical dominance he had this season was with Carson Wentz at quarterback. But, the Vikings did give up a few key catches last week to Josh Hill from Drew Brees. It's worth noting that, if I had thought of Zach Ertz probably when you asked that question before, I might have picked him. But I think he's definitely something to watch too. He's a big red zone threat. He's one of those guys he's open when he's not open, right? You could throw it to him when he's guarded perfectly, defended perfectly, and he still could make that catch. So, watching if it's Anthony Barr guarding him, if it's going to be Harrison Smith defending him, Anderson Dahill might cover him if he's healthy. That'll be the X factor, I think, or one of the X factors in this game too for Philly's offense, getting that ground game going, and then basically their success to Ertz, I think, might define their passing game because they're going to keep it limited. They're not going to go down the field. Nick Foles doesn't do that. It's going to be a dink and dunk type offense, and I think a lot of that falls on Zach Ertz over the middle on those short crossers, short hitches. So defending those will be important, I think, for the Vikings.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think that we've pretty well covered the Eagles at this point here. So do you want to jump into some social media takes and questions, stuff like that? We'll round out the show.
Yeah, we'll put our picks into at the end because I believe we are tied in the playoff competition between me and you. So
let's do it.
We'll get to those. But first of all, I wanted to get to a couple from the last show that we did not have time for. From Josh Sweetland at Sweet Skull. He asked about Pat Shurmur, now that he's expected anyway to be gone, taking the job with the Giants. Do we expect any of the other coordinators on the Vikings to follow him over there, whether it be the defense coordinator George Edwards, or it could be Andre Patterson, Jerry Gray on defense, or it could be Kevin Stefanski even at quarterback coach. Do you think any of that will happen?
Well, you look at I would say probably not. But looking at the situation here, I would think that Jerry Gray probably would make the most sense to follow him. Simply because they have a lot of very good defensive backs. Janoris Jenkins kind of highlighting that group. So if I had to pick one, I would say Jerry Gray is probably the most likely. At the same time, I don't have a clue. I don't know what Jerry Gray wants to do with his life. Maybe he doesn't want to be a defensive coordinator. Maybe he just likes being a defensive backs coach in Minnesota with Mike Zimmer. But that's, again, ultimately it comes down to what Jerry Gray wants to do. But I do think that he could do a lot of good for that secondary that is very talented in New York, but somewhat undisciplined. And I think that that's something that, Pat Shurmur recognizes in Jerry Gray, seeing what he's been able to get from his cornerbacks. And I would say that's probably the best bet as a Vikings coach to follow him over to New York in the event that Pat Shurmur does leave, which again, until he says it, I'm not going to buy it. It may very well be true at this point, but I don't know. So when he signs with the Giants, we'll know. But right now, he is the Vikings offensive coordinator. So that's what I see.
I'm going to buy that he's gone just because it's a really good opportunity for him. I think New York is not, in my opinion, they're not completely down in the dumps. Like I feel like they're one of those teams that could turn it around quickly, and I think they just need the right leadership. So, I wouldn't bet on a coordinator jumping over with him, but I do think Patterson and Gray are very well qualified to be defensive coordinators if they want to. Sure. Our other one here from the other day from Eli at Skolsky's asking about the offensive line combination. They rolled out a new one against the Saints that had not played together before. How do you feel about how it went, and if they should make any changes, I guess, this week?
Well, again, I'm kind of more. I think I'm more interested in hearing your thoughts on this because my line of thinking sort of doesn't really change. I don't necessarily believe there are any specific changes that need to be made, but I do think that the Vikings can do a better job than they did last week. Again,
they can always do a better job, but I would never change the order or the configuration of the offensive line at this point. Just you want to get as much continuity as you can,
right?
And I think you've put your best five out there. That's kind of I think the method they went with is their most talented five linemen. They put them out there, so I think you have to stick with them for now. And again, I just think more help for Rashad Hill on that right side against Graham is going to be the key. And if that means sacrificing one receiver, if it's Rudolph for 3 seconds of the route, and then just kind of have him as a check down option, that so be it. I think you save a sack there and gain 4 yards with Rudolph if you need to. So that's kind of how I see that. But I can get to the next question here once I load it because I had my phone turned off. So we got a good one from our sports grunt here. I'll just read this one off. You want to hear a joke? Nick Foles, zing. Very good, very good.
Kyle. Okay.
Napoleon Dynamite?
Yeah.
Is that a better joke?
I did see
like
that
Napoleon
one.
Dynamite?
I mean, so.
How about the Halloween costume? If Nick Foles dressed up as Napoleon Dynamite, it'd be perfect.
Yeah, that would be good. Nick Foles is not awesome. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it there.
He's not. But I do think a dink and dunk offense run by him. If the Vikings don't press for most of the game, that could beat the Vikings a couple of times, and that could be enough. But from our buddy Mr. Mason at @IKeepIt_SoReal.
So real.
What's your biggest worry or the biggest impact player for this game? I think he's assuming for Philadelphia. So who's the guy you're most scared of for Philadelphia on either side?
Fletcher Cox.
Yeah.
I think he's super disruptive. I've been kind of going with this one throughout the week here. Fletcher Cox is extremely disruptive in the interior, and on top of that, he helps the guys behind him as well simply by getting pressure early. I've talked about throughout the year that if the defensive line defensive line consistently gets good pressure, it's a lot easier for the guys behind him to do their job well. You just need to kind of follow the rules and trust the scheme. So Fletcher Cox is a guy that has always just kind of gone about his business and done what he can in terms of being a clogger at times, sometimes being an interior pass rusher. It depends on the play call. So I think that he's the most important player to neutralize, because if you can stop him from getting into the backfield, it's a lot easier to attack those cornerbacks on the outside. They're still young. Darby and Mills are very good players, but they're still young. And so experience matters. We've talked about this throughout the year too, that when you're not as familiar with tendencies, it's a little bit more difficult to kind of gauge what's coming at you. So neutralize Fletcher Cox. That's kind of going to be, that's putting a lot on Pat Elflein to a degree, and those guards in the interior. But I think the Vikings have a very good opportunity here to, if you stop him, you stop a lot of this Philadelphia defense.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of say the same thing about Brandon Graham too. I said it earlier in the show. Rashad Hill over there, kind of isolated with him, scares me, and I think the Vikings need to give him some help. But you mentioned those defensive backs, and it's a very talented trio, no doubt, Robinson, Darby, and Mills. But I think we should also mention that this is a tough test for them as well, with Diggs and Thielen. Thielen and Lattimore had one heck of a matchup last week. Both of them were playing at their best, and they both made some phenomenal plays. You could say Thielen got the best of him if you want to. What was it, 6 catches for 74 yards, I believe, on 9 targets. So that's not awful if you're looking at it from Lattimore's perspective. But I think it's not like Thielen can't get production out of these or against these guys, or Diggs can't get production out against these guys. So I'm slightly concerned about these DBs being very, very good, but I do trust Diggs and Thielen to get theirs, I guess you could say. So I'm scared about Graham, but not as scared about those DBs.
Right.
So again, Diggs and Thielen, they can play.
Absolutely.
We'll get 2 more here. One from Joe Schneider. This could be a quick one, I think. Should we read into anything about the future of Teddy and the team with Sam getting the activation last week and Teddy inactive versus the Saints?
No, I don't think you should. I think that's just another opportunity for the Vikings to sort of mess with the opposing team's heads. If you activate Sam Bradford, it threatens the fact that he might step in. That's just one more guy you got to prepare for. So if you had been preparing for potentially Teddy Bridgewater coming into the game, just because again Mike Zimmer hasn't officially named a starting quarterback,
that's true.
Still, you have to prepare a little bit for Sam Bradford, and if you've been preparing all week for the potential of Teddy Bridgewater, that just gives you one more guy to waste time on. Whether or not they're going to play or not, I don't know, but that's what Mike Zimmer does really well, is he messes with your head. He messes with my head. It's like you try to figure out the most rational example for it, and there isn't a good example here.
Mike Zimmer is going to share as little information as he can. And if he doesn't have to share who the backups or the starting quarterback is, he's not going to. He's just going to so for what is here, I think I'll be very surprised if Teddy Bridgewater's back next season. I'll say that. I had a different opinion on this before, but again, he's not going to be a starter anywhere, I don't think. I think, unfortunately, and it's super unfortunate for him, given the way he was drafted as a franchise quarterback, had the injury, then now he's got Keenum and Bradford coming in to replace him, both in a matter of 2 years. His market has gone super, had gone downward very, very fast. And I think he's not going to be a starter anywhere, unfortunately. But he's not going to be back in Minnesota, I don't think.
I'm with
last
you as well.
Question here. Yep. From Drew Osmussen at DrewOzzy4. So much has been said about the field in Philadelphia. How have they not gone to an artificial turf yet? And is there an advantage for the Eagles because they've played on this turf all year long?
Interesting thought. I was actually talking about this with Arif Hassan yesterday. That if you know the playing surface better, it might give you somewhat of an advantage because you have an idea of where the divots may be or where you might slip or something like that. But at the same time, and this is the point that Arif made that I thought that was so brilliant, is that if you force guys to play to where you know those divots are going to be, that's to a degree a problem for the opposing team. But if you just kind of ignore it and pretend like it's not even there and just do your thing and then just make up for, if you slip, make up for it later, it's not all that big of a deal. So does it give Philadelphia an advantage? Always, just because they're playing on their home field. That's anytime you're playing.
I mean, it could get into their own head too. Like, what if they try too hard to either think about it, or they're trying too hard to funnel the Vikings into a certain position on the field, or they're in their own head trying to slow down their own cuts on the field. Meanwhile, the Vikings aren't thinking about it as much. And I mean, sure, they might slip, it might happen, but they probably aren't thinking about it nearly as hard as Philadelphia is. That's, I guess, my answer for that. And the whole turf versus grass, I enjoy a grass field, as long as it's well kept, and it's tough to keep it well, I guess, in January 20th or whatever date the game will be. That's always tough, and you see Lambeau Field in January, it's like literally gray. So
it's tough on both teams, though. It's not right,
like, and it is, and that's home field advantage. I mean, that's why you vie for number one seed. That's why the Vikings lost to Carolina was so big, is because if the Vikings beat Carolina, they have the one seed, and they're playing at turf at US Bank Stadium. The Eagles earned that home field advantage, and this is a fair home field advantage. If the turf's different, the turf's different. Both teams are playing on the same turf, so it's not like an unfair advantage. It's what it is. It's an experience thing. If you're more experienced playing on one surface than another, chances seem good that you're probably going to play better on the surface that you've played on more frequently. That's the rational way to explain that. Is there a definitive advantage one way or the other to kind of simplify this question? Probably not. I would say no, because I think that Mike Zimmer prepares really well, and I also think that Doug Peterson prepares very well. So it's a battle. It's ultimately going to be a battle of coaches, a battle of wits to a degree, and we'll see how that pans out on Sunday. So once again, folks, make sure to come down for that watch party. If you have not already purchased a ticket, remember, you don't necessarily have to purchase it online. It's a good way it makes it, I guess, easier for us in terms of knowing what to expect. But if you just go up to the bar there, you can get in for free. We're not going to stop anyone at the door if you don't have a 20 spot on you. That's not a problem for us. But if you go up to the bar and you say, I listen to the About the Labor podcast, or just literally just say, if you walk up to them and say, hey, can I get a beer? About the Labor, by the way, they'll probably just give you the special. That's kind of, that's how it works. So, mention the podcast if you're coming. Enjoy the game if you're coming, and hopefully you'll make it out for the pregame show. We'll be on social media later on this week to kind of finish off the details that we have sort of loosely explained to date. As for the podcast, where you can find us, Zone Coverage is where you can find my work. VikingsTerritory.com. That's where you can find Drew's work. Castbox, iTunes, Stitcher. Those are the primary spots that you can find the podcast. Who you got? Let's make our picks quick this weekend.
Oh, that's right. Give me, so for Vikings, Eagles, I think the Vikings are going to win. That's my pick.
All right, fair enough.
Jaguars, Patriots, give me the Jaguars.
Ooh,
okay. I like the Jaguars in that matchup. So those are the two games.
You didn't bet on the Jags last week, and I didn't came back to haunt you. But I'll take the Vikings. I'll take the Vikings 17-13, low scoring game. I don't think either team will get to 20 points, and that might benefit the Vikings. It also might benefit Philly. Who knows? Both teams are defensive, and I think you're going to see that Sunday. I'll take the Patriots just because you picked the Jags for one, and I want to beat you in this contest. But also because, Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, it's tough to bet against them right now. And I would imagine what Belichick does really well is take away the other team's best player. Mm-hmm. He'll take away Leonard Fournette. He'll make Blake Bortles beat him. And I don't like those odds, so I'll take the Patriots.
Fair enough. All right, so those are the picks. Drew and I are opposing each other in the Patriots-Jaguars game, and we're all both on the same page that the Vikings, we believe, are the better team here to go into Philadelphia and get the W over those number one seeded Eagles. So that wraps up the show. Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you haven't done that already, and we will catch you guys hopefully at the watch party on Sunday.